Mac Power Users, episode 726, Journaling Update, Apple's new app, Day 1 updates, and more. Hello and welcome back to Mac Power Users, and Happy New Year. I'm Stephen Hackett, and I'm joined by my friend and your friend, Mr. David Sparks.
Happy New Year to you as well, Mr. Hackett. It's really fun starting a new year out with my buddy Stephen on the Mac Power Users.
Mm-hmm. And we have the world's clunkiest episode title. I worked on that for quite a while. I was like, how do I bring this down so it's shorter? I just couldn't do it. So
yeah, I mean, you could have asked AI, right?
I know. We're in Notion. It's just right there. I should have done it. But yes, This is the long promised look at Apple's Journal app and the Suggestions API. We've got a lot of stuff there to cover. But first, you have an announcement.
Yeah, I am very pleased to announce the Productivity Field Guide will be releasing to the public on January 9th, just a couple days after this show drops. And we're going to cover it next week on the Mac Power Users. This is a different one for me. You know, it's not an app focus. It's kind of a productivity journey, both mine and sharing my experience and hopefully inspiring you to figure yours out. And it's just something I've been working on for 7 years. It's a long story. We'll talk about it next week. But the short version for today is it's available in 2 days if you go to macsparky.com or learn.macsparky.com. If you use code PFGMPU, Productivity Field Guide Mac Power Users, PFGMPU, you get 10% off. And we'll talk more about it next week. But I'm very happy to get this one into the world.
Yeah, I know this has been in the oven. Where do field guides come from? Maybe that's too complicated to answer.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it's a 7-year journey. 7-year journey. I mean, that's like you grow an entire set of cells every 7 years. So it's like a different person that started that one. But now it's out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll get into that next week. Super excited to hear from you about that. And today on More Power Users, which is the longer ad-free version of the show, you can learn more about that. There's a link right in the show notes. We're going to check in with you because this marks 1 year since you sort of hung it up as a lawyer and went full-time Mac Sparky content creator, maker of field guides, podcaster extraordinaire. And we're just going to check in on that. So,
except I want to correct you. 2 years.
Is it 2 years?
Yes, it's 2 years.
Wow. I even wrote 1 year in the document. Man, 2 years.
I switched it to 2. But
okay.
2 years, man.
Oh, yeah, look
but
at this.
Know what?
January 2022.
I needed the second one to get to where I am now. So we'll talk about it. I have thoughts.
I missed a whole year. Look, this is the podcast equivalent of signing the wrong date on your check. Young people won't know what that means, but we know what it means.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
right.
So I've just done that now with you. But we're going to check in on 2 years of Indie Sparky.
All right. Journaling. You know, that was one of the first episodes we did when you joined. We did a deep journaling episode on day 1. And it's been now many years since then. And the landscape has changed quite a bit. Day 1 is still around. We're going to be talking about that. But there's also an app from Apple, and there's a growing movement towards analog journaling. And I thought we should just let's cover the territory, buddy.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think we should start with, what do we even mean by journaling? What is this practice? What is the role of this practice?
Yeah, I feel like this is a fundamental question on journaling. If you want to get into it, is you need to first answer the question, why am I doing this? Because there are a lot of different motivations for journaling, and the motivation you choose really will dictate the way you do it. And if you want to be successful, you need to start out understanding what it is you want. Like, I think a lot of people think of journaling as kind of like the legacy thing where I'm going to write down these deep thoughts and my grandchildren are going to read it and it's going to help them through their lives, and I'm going to, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine if you want to do that, but that changes the medium and how you go about doing it. And I'm not judging. I think that's a perfectly good reason to journal. However, I don't do that. My goal of journaling is to make myself better today. It's a self-reflective process. There's all kinds of ways people get insight to themselves. I've
Hmm.
never done therapy, but like the way I understand therapy is like the therapists never tell you what to do. They try to just like lead you along the path until you figure out, oh yeah, I'm in an abusive relationship, or I need to get, treat myself better, whatever it is that you get out of therapy. You eventually get to your own conclusion. Well, journaling to me is the therapist. I By me writing stuff down, I get more insight as to what I'm thinking, and I help course correct myself.
Hmm.
So that's my goal for journaling. Just an interesting side story is lately the meditations of Marcus Aurelius keep coming up. I think they're just really entering popular culture. Ryan Holiday, talks about Stoicism a lot, and that's got it out there. We just watched The Holdovers on Christmas. I don't know if you saw that movie. It's a really good movie, by the way. But it's about this ancient history teacher who's, kind of broken and blah, blah, blah. But at Christmas, he gives everybody a copy of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, And so that's like the journal that everybody looks at. But the funny thing about it is Marcus did not write it to be published.
Hmm.
Meditations to him was just notes to himself about he was the ruler of Rome, right? He was the emperor of Rome. He didn't want to screw up, and he kept writing himself notes about how to be a better leader and how to be a better person. And everybody thinks that he wrote this for the ages, and he wrote it just for himself. I don't think he ever intended for anyone else to read it, as the story goes. But that was a long story to say you can also do journaling as a daily practice to help yourself
Yeah.
without really making it into a legacy thing. In fact, I would recommend if you want to do the legacy thing, get like a book and write down the gems. Don't tell them about the days that you woke up feeling crappy. It doesn't really help. But that's a whole different reason to journal. And the purpose of your journaling plays a role in the tool set you pick. Like it really makes a difference. Like to
Hmm.
me, I don't care about my kids reading the stuff. In fact, because I'm so honest with it, I'm not sure I want them to read it. And so the journal I write is I don't care about, making it something that they can find after I'm dead or whatever. I just
Hmm.
want to make sure I can turn it into something I use. And that really affects, how you do it. So
Right.
the first question to answer to yourself is what am I doing as a journaler?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. For me, a large part of my journaling over the years starts with a photo. A lot of my journaling is sort of cataloging memories, and so for me, something like day one makes a lot of sense as opposed to analog journaling. But also mixed in there are those sort of long text entries that are more introspective. And the way I approach it is exactly the way you approach it is this is for me. This is for me to process things. This is for me to think through things on paper. I think you and I are very alike in the fact that we think through writing. That I don't really know what I think about something until I sit down and start writing about it. And that's where this fits in for me. And I don't really think about who may read it in the future. It's not for my kids. It's not for anybody else. It's just for me. And I think that those answers are going to be different for everybody. And I think also it's okay if that changes over time. When I started journaling like 10 or 11 years ago, started taking it seriously, I was not seeing a counselor, and now I do. And there are things that I write about that then I go talk about with my therapist, and then things that we talk about together feed back into it. And so it's changed for me over time, and that's fine because I've changed over time, and what I want and need out of it has changed over time. So I think it's one of those things people can be too precious about, or like
Yes.
it's the new notebook problem, right? It's the, I don't want to start writing in this notebook because what if I change what it's going to be used for, or like that doesn't matter. This shouldn't be precious. It's a tool like anything else, and it's totally okay if you get 3 months into it or 3 decades into it and change gears. That's totally fine.
Yeah, totally. And I really think that it's I guess I should have started with should you journal, and I do think you should.
Yep.
If you've never done it before, it really I find it incredibly insightful. I've got an over 30-year meditation practice and a journaling practice, and I think those two things together have made my life better. They make me a better person. It makes it easier to deal with challenges. I don't know. I just dig it that I've got this insight. I was telling one of my kids about it and said, the thing is, if you ever saw Harry Potter with the pensive,
Yeah.
And the thing where he can go into his memories and look around them. Well, and that actually in Harry Potter, you look at other people's memories, but this to me is a human pensive. I write it down and it allows me to look at events of my life from different angles once I write it down. And I'm a big fan of it. And it's never been easier because now you've got a free app on your phone that lets you do it.
Hmm.
And I guess we should just kind of talk about let's just spoil it here. How are we journaling? We're going to share a lot of methods here, but let's just go in telling everybody what we're doing.
Yeah, mine has not changed with the advent of the journal app, which we are going to cover in great detail in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
But I am using Day One. I continue to use it and love it and pay for it yearly, with some handwritten stuff as well, like in a field notes notebook. And those pages will get photographed or scanned into Day One. And that's been that way for a long time. If I ever go through like old home screen images, Day One has been there for like a decade. It's been there a really long time.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing with day one is you get the advantage over time of that, like this day in history kind of
Yes.
button. And with me having so much in there, and like you, I also journal memories. And it just brings me no end of delight to see these old pictures of days we spent together. Like through the holidays, it was spitting up a lot of
Oh yeah.
holiday memories to me. And I really love that. I can see myself someday when I'm this old guy drooling on myself, just looking at these day one entries and smiling. So I think that's a big benefit of that app. My answer to that is it's kind of complicated, but it's not really that complicated.
Hmm.
Every year around November, December, I start getting itchy about January. You know, because I'm Max Sparky, I'm always trying different apps and tool sets. And there's something about January 1st. I kind of want to have my working tool set in order for the year on January 1st. Doesn't make any sense, but there you have it. So, as we were heading in, I was thinking seriously about the idea of switching to analog journaling. I've added some analog elements to some of my productivity stack last year. It just, to help. I call it that last mile stuff. We've talked about it on the show. And I got thinking, well, maybe I should just switch over to analog journaling. I mean, there are so many people that love analog journaling. And if you go on YouTube, they're all telling you how meaningful it is and, blah, blah, blah. So I experimented with it last year. And then I even took the bullet journal course from Ryder Carroll. And went through it all. I did some experiments. Ultimately, as I hit January 1 and I had to make a decision, I'm in day one. I'm not going to analog journal. You know what I mean? Sometimes I may write some stuff down and scan it, but I still think that I can get meaningful journaling out of a digital tool. And in a lot of ways, I get better journaling out of a digital tool because I can dictate to it and do,
Hmm.
add pictures and things. So, kind of going in, both Stephen and I are in the bag for day one. Just paid for my annual subscription, renewal as well. But I do have some analog stuff. I do a little bit of logging in Obsidian, but that's kind of work tracking stuff. It's not really journaling stuff. And we're both day one people still
Yeah.
after all these years.
After all these years, it continues to be a great product. One thing people always bring up, or and it's worth discussing, is the level of privacy and security you have with a digital journal, right? If you're journaling in a notebook that's always in your back pocket, as long as the notebook doesn't get stolen by somebody, or you leave it behind on the subway, you have physical access to it. You can put it in your safety deposit box or whatever. But when you're doing this digitally, obviously that's different, right? You have data that's either on your device and or syncing to someone else's server or to iCloud or something like that. And so, whatever you are looking at, end-to-end encryption really is key. That means that the data on the day one servers or on the iCloud server or whatever else software you're using, that the people who manage those servers cannot see your data, right? That is critically important in this realm. And this was not always the case for day one. They added end-to-end encryption several years ago now, but it is something to consider when you look at these applications. How is my data being stored? How is it being synced? Is it encrypted? And the end-to-end encryption in day one and the journal app and some others, it doesn't get in the way. It's really simple. I think end-to-end is on by default now on day one. When they rolled it out, there was a little kind of step you need to take to turn it on. I did it instantly and it was totally fine. But that is something, if you're looking at software to do this, that should be very high on your list of features that you want to make sure you understand what it's doing and how it's doing it.
Yeah, and it really gets to the bottom of, why are you journaling? If you are journaling to make yourself better, you have to be completely honest with those journal entries.
Yep.
And sometimes when you're feeling uncomfortable about something, you need to write it down. That's if you want that pensive effect, you've got to commit it. And that's why you need a system that has end-to-end encryption and you can feel comfortable putting into a digital system that's not going to go somewhere. Like putting it on a Microsoft Word doc and syncing it through Dropbox, that's not going to cut it. I feel like that's a bad idea. You need end-to-end encryption. And that's why I really recommend, if you want to journal, get a tool that has it. And the two big ones we're talking about, the journal app and day one, both have end-to-end, but there's other ways to do it. People who journal Obsidian, if you use Obsidian Sync, they have end-to-end encryption. End-to-end encryption is not rare these days, but it's not universal. So just make sure wherever you're going to put these intimate journal entries that you got yourself protected. Like I wouldn't do it. I see a bunch of people doing it in Notion. I would not do it in Notion. I mean, we're Notion fans. We run the show out of Notion, but it's not an end-to-end encrypted solution, and I don't think you should put a journal in there.
Agreed. So that brings us to Apple's entry into the market. And that comes in kind of two phases. We have the journal app for iPhone, but we also have the journaling suggestions API, which powers the journal app as well as some other things. And normally talking about an API, which is a service within the operating system, that's normally not something we would get into great detail on MPU. But I think it's really important because what Apple has built here is not only a journal app for their phone, but they've built the plumbing so other apps like Day One and Everlog and others can tie into this new system. And that is like Apple at its best. I don't mind Apple moving into a market and building something of their own, but it's even better when they do it and provide OS level services that third-party developers can take advantage of. And that's exactly what they've done here. And there have been times Apple hasn't done that, but they did it here. They've done it with other things like Apple Maps, right? You can plug Apple Maps data into your third-party app or whatever. But I am extremely happy the way that Apple has taken this route of doing both things.
Yeah, Apple at its best. You took words right out of my mouth. I feel like they said, we're going to bring a journal app, but we're going to make every journal app better at the same time. And we're going to provide a secure way for journaling apps to access memories and things that, triggers for journaling that you may not otherwise. They can't open up the entire phone to Day One to go, sift through it and find things that you may want to journal about, but Apple can. And then they can choose to share that with Day One in a secure way, which is what they've done. And hats off. I mean, more of this, Apple. I love it when they do stuff like this.
Yeah, so let's get into the journaling suggestions API. I do have some. I debated this. I do have some documentation from Apple in the show notes if you want to go see what they say about it if you're so inclined. But at the high level, this is an API. So this is a service within iOS that senses your usage across your phone and across a bunch of different apps, including the content that you're enjoying, locations you visit, and can securely and privately suggest that content based on your actions to Apple's journaling app and others. And you may think, oh my gosh, my phone is tracking everything I do. This is built on top of some other technology that things like Handoff and some other things are built on. The system already can accept activity data from a bunch of different types of apps. And this is a new use case kind of built on top of those shoulders. And currently, this is all powered by native Apple apps like Apple Music, Apple Podcast, Photos, Fitness, the phone app, etc. So if you're like me and you listen to podcasts in Overcast, or maybe you use Spotify for your music, that content will not be suggested to this API. However, Apple does say third-party developers can adopt this, but this is early days and we haven't seen that yet. So right now, this is primarily powered by Apple apps. And honestly, for me, going back to my use case I explained a second ago, a lot of my journaling is prompted by a photo. And so for me to have journaling suggestions being powered by, photos on this day years ago, or it can bring in the photo memory features from the photo app and you can bring those in. It can group photos based on location and time. So like over the holidays, right? We went to Christmas over here and New Year's Eve over here. It can bundle those together and suggest them as a journal entry all together. That's awesome. And I really like the way that that's working. But I do look forward to when more apps can provide content to this.
Yeah, but honestly, Apple's the source that I want the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't at the same time, like I also don't really I'm not really going to journal about like what I'm listening to in Overcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually a podcast doesn't have that sort of influence on me. And if it did, I would just find the link and put the link in the journal, right?
Or like OmniFocus, hey, you should journal about the 3 things you did today. I'm not sure I want to do that.
Yeah, there will be uses that make more sense than others, definitely.
Yeah.
The types of content that are supported, there's kind of 5 big buckets currently. So there's activity, so workouts and exercise. So, it can detect, I went for a walk. Maybe I want to have a journal entry about what I thought about on that walk. So it can provide the fitness data to a journal entry. You've got media, so music and podcasts. I'm listening to this. It made me think these things or feel these things. I want to write about it. And it even pulls in like the show art or the music or the artwork for the album, which is pretty neat. Contacts, so people you're messaging and calling. Photos, which we talked about a second ago, from your library or memories or even photos shared with you. And then significant locations, so places where time is spent. So I went to this small town in Mississippi where I have family. These are the photos I took while we were there for New Year's, and it can kind of bundle all of that together.
Yeah.
It's cool. And to your point, looking at this list, I don't know if I have any like super low-hanging fruit of what I would like added.
Yeah. Agreed. But and the beauty of it is this works everywhere now. So they've already implemented it in day 1, but it also works in Apple's journal app that we're going to cover in a minute here. It's a very smart implementation. They announced it in June. We didn't get it until recently, but I've been working with it and it generally works. It surfaces interesting things. We went out on New Year's Day to a place that you could probably get in one guess. And then this morning it gave me a bunch of pictures saying, hey, would you like to journal about this thing you did at Disneyland yesterday with your family? And I like that. I like the prompts, and to the extent that your journal is a memory device, and this is going to be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's done in a way that is private and on device. So this stuff's not all getting processed by iCloud. It's being processed on the phone. This API has been empowered with machine learning to sort through all the stuff on your device and make suggestions for you. It's not going off to some server farm somewhere. It's also private in the sense that the journal app or day 1 or other third-party app you're using, it can't actually see any suggestions until I say, take this suggestion and turn it into a journal entry. So I am the one, air quotes, promoting content out of the suggestion panel into the application. And at that point, of course, the app can see it because it's in the app and it's got to sync it or deal with it somehow. But it's up to me to choose what the journal app or what day 1 or these other apps can see. And so it may suggest things that you don't want in the journal app, right? Like, oh, I don't want, I don't want people to know that I secretly listen to Windows power users, right? Then I don't ever have to bring that into a journal. So not only is it private and secure in the sense that it's just happening on your phone, but it's also private and secure in the sense that journaling apps, the reason this exists, can't see any information unless I tell it, turn this into an entry. And that's where I think the real work went into this in terms of thinking about security and privacy. I would not have thought about, like just because it's in the suggested list, can the apps see all of that stuff? Like that's why these people get paid the big bucks at Apple to think about these things. And I really like the way that has settled out.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, it's modal. Like when you say, I would like a suggestion, the suggestion API takes over your phone. It's not dropping all that stuff into the journal app. It's just saying, here are some things, David, that I see for you. Would you like to use one of these? And if I click one, then it goes back to the journal app and deposits it at that moment. So it really is well thought out. I mean, this is, I guess we've already said it, but Apple at its best, finding a way to use all of that intimate data on your device and allow you to use it in a non-creepy way to, better your life. And I feel like the mission accomplished here.
Yeah.
It is just on the iPhone. That's something that's weird, right? But maybe that's part of the reason is because of all this privacy and this API. And honestly, a lot of this data will primarily be on your phone because that's the thing in your pocket everywhere you go. At first I was kind of thinking of that as a bummer, but to be honest, I've been now using it for a few weeks, and it's really not that much of a hindrance.
Yeah, I think the only bummer for me is that if I want to write or edit longer entries, I'd rather do it on an iPad or a Mac, like with a hardware keyboard.
Yeah.
But from the suggestions perspective, the iPhone obviously is where this should be based. And because Apple's not syncing this data around with iCloud, it's not like I can open an app on my Mac and it has suggestions from my phone. Maybe that's coming. Maybe they'll enable that at some point. I don't think I would have a problem with that. Like if it's just syncing within my own iCloud stuff, because like my photos are already all in iCloud, my contacts are already in iCloud. Like not that big of a deal to me. But the journal app only being on the phone, I think some people find a little frustrating. Maybe we'll see it expand. I kind of think we will, but clearly they just, they started with the most important device, and I cannot fault them for that.
Yeah. And in fairness, like I picked up a suggestion yesterday on my phone and added it to day one. And now that day one entry is in day one everywhere.
Yes.
So like you can be on your Mac, and if you want to go more substantive into it, you can add later at a different device.
Yes. Yeah. That is one, another point in the day one column for me, for sure.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Get 20% off 1Password. Just go to onepassword.com/MPU. 1Password really is a lot more than just a password manager. It's a security suite. With 1Password, you can protect yourself, your family, your workforce with simple security and easy secret sharing and actionable insight reports. One of my big goals for this month is I'm bringing on a person to help me with some of the customer support and kind of background stuff I do at MacSparky. And this is long overdue, but something I've always struggled with. Well, one of the first things I'm doing is setting up a 1Password account for that person. So we can have a shared vault. I can give her what she needs without giving her all the keys to the kingdom. It's exactly that granularity that I love about 1Password. Whether you're sharing it with coworkers or family or whatever, you can decide what gets shared and what doesn't, and 1Password securely does it for you. They have simple and secure sharing of passwords. You can quickly share any 1Password item from your desktop app or browser. At the same time, you're getting that entire suite of power tools for security from 1Password on the back end. They monitor and mitigate risks like potential data breaches. When you set it up, you have an additional secret key, which provides a unique extra layer of security and proven protection. It's private by default. They can't see passwords or sensitive information stored in 1Password, so they can't use it, share it, or sell it. and neither can anyone else. And they are regularly verified by third-party audits and one of the industry's largest bug bounties to help them act on threats before they can affect you. 1Password really is a company completely dedicated to your security. And in these days, that's exactly what you need. So I feel completely comfortable bringing this person on, giving her access to some of the passwords through a 1Password shared vault, but not all of them. And it's just going to be great. And I can't wait to get started with that. And 1Password is going to be right there for me. Whether you're working with your family or your coworkers, 1Password will be there for you. Go to onepassword.com/MPU to get yourself 20% off. Once again, that's onepassword.com/MPU. Check it out and let them know you heard about it here on the Mac Power Users.
So that brings us to the Journal app itself. We got a couple of links to some kind of reviews from friends at Six Colors and Mac Stories. Those will be in the show notes. Tell us a little bit about the basics of the app.
Basics is the right word for it. It's a journal app, right? I mean, the big piece of it to me is the suggestions, but you can journal on your phone with a free app, and it uses, security, so you can lock it up with Face ID, Touch ID. The data in your journal syncs with iCloud. So if you have two phones, you'll see content on both, but it has to be a phone, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to get it on your iPad or your Mac. So
Right.
it's limited, really. I mean, and also who has two phones, right? I mean,
I mean, some people do, but it's not. I'd imagine in that scenario, it's a personal phone and a work phone, and you wouldn't want this on your work phone. I don't think.
Yeah, but I mean,
my guess.
The it's got a minimal user interface. Like watch the labs video if you want to kind of get a tour of it. But I think that's kind of good for a journaling app. You just open it up and you start typing or dictating to it. And this is something. This may be a repeating point for me today, but if you are digital journaling, I can't recommend highly enough the idea of using voice to text dictation to do journal entries. And I'm not saying you do all of them that way, but often I do them when I'm thinking through a problem and I just start talking. And to me, like, this is an advantage for me over analog journaling. Is analog journaling is very intentional, but I write slow. Whereas if I can just start talking, a lot of times I talk around a problem and start finding solutions just by talking. And it's writing down everything I say so I can go back and read it and kind of almost dissect the process later and edit it down if I want. But you get this with the Apple Journal app, just like you get it with any other, digital tool on iPhone. Hit the microphone button and just start talking. And that's one of the ways I like to use, journal apps, including this one, especially on a small device like a phone where I can't type that fast on the little keyboard.
I definitely agree with all of that. I do a lot of dictation into day one. I think it's I think it's fine that this app is basic. Like if you look at the video, or just like if you have it on your phone at iOS 17.2, it is very bare bones. And at first that turned me off a little bit. I was like, oh, this is like minimal viable product kind of stuff. But the more I've used it, the more I've come to understand that they want the app just to get out of the way. Now, it's not to say there are not features that I wish it had. There certainly are, and we'll talk about those. But its simplicity should not turn you off, I don't think. Because the key thing it's doing, right, is giving you these prompts via the Suggestions API, and then getting you to write or dictate to it. And it does that flawlessly. When you first launch the app, you can customize what sorts of journaling suggestions you want. You can also enable a couple of different types of notifications. So you can have a notification when a new suggestion is ready. I had this on while preparing for this, and it was interesting to see like how often in the background it was just like, oh, hey, these photos from yesterday are kind of grouped together. Or, oh, you were here. Do you want to have a journal entry about it? You can also, though, set up notifications for like a journaling schedule. So say that you have a goal for the year to journal every other day. Well, you can go in there and set, send me a notification every other day at a set time. You only get one time a day. So you can't say, remind me at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. some days and 10 p.m. other days. It's a little limited in the customization. But I think for most people, and this is honestly how I do it, a lot of my journaling is either the very beginning of the day or the very end. And I think if you want those notifications, I think what they've given you is enough. I wouldn't mind a little more flexibility, but especially when you're starting out, I think the notifications may prove helpful for some people.
Yeah. And the process of creating a new entry is really simple. You hit the plus button and you start typing or talking. I mean, there is no on ramp here. You load the app, it's obvious. You hit the plus button and you start journaling. It's almost got like a drafts feel and how easy it is to get right.
It kind of does.
And I think this is, if you've never journaled before, this is the perfect place to start with this and find out if it works for you or not. As you journal more, I don't think the notifications really are necessary. You'll start to know when you want to journal. Like sometimes it's like I call it kind of clearing the cache in my brain. You know, It's like you get like a lot in there. I'm thinking a lot about this stuff. Let me write some of it down. Even like, this is silly, but we talked earlier about how I went through that process of looking at analog versus digital journaling. Well, the way I figured out the answer was I journaled about it. I mean, because to me, it's just getting the thoughts out of my brain and onto a piece of paper or into a computer screen. And it's like, it just brings clarity. And then like, if I ever get tempted to, say, well, I'm going to throw everything out and just get paper journals, I'll go back and read that entry and look at my thought process so I don't have to do it again. Just stuff like that is quite useful.
Yeah, I think so too. When you go to create an entry, you hit that big plus button, and then the suggestions panel slides in. And at this point, you are in the realm of the journal suggestions API.
Yeah.
Where you've got a kind of two tabs. You have recommended. So this is suggestions the API thinks are the most relevant to you. And then recent, which is basically all the suggestions based chronologically. And this view is the same in any app that is using the suggestions API. So in day one, when you create an entry from the suggestions from the system, the view is the same. And this is where you can pick, okay, I want to choose this fitness activity or this set of photos or this podcast or this phone call as the start of my entry. It's simple, but again, I think it totally works. I even like the division of recommended and recent because I would assume in reading the documentation that it will learn over time, look, this guy's never going to write a journal about a phone call, right? And maybe it tunes some of those out in the recommendations. But if I do want to do it, it's over in the recents tab. And I like that division. And I think it's really useful to have both there.
Totally agree. I think it's just well done, And once you put an entry in, like this is a problem. You can change the date, but you can't change the time.
Yeah. And in fact, entries don't have time. There's not like any editor for it at all. You can't even like choose it. It's wild.
And this, I feel like you and I are clearly day one power users, right? Because we've been using the app over a decade. But I actually like that feature where like one of the things in day one is you can drag in a photo and it puts the date and time in from the photo stamp, and then the entry matches. So like if I want to journal about something I'm out in the world, I just take a picture and then later I create an entry on that and everything is done for me automatically. Not quite there with the journal app, but again, I think, we are asking Apple to make this a power user app, and I don't think that's their intention. It's kind of like the iPad question, right? You got to use it where they made it and what they want with it. They wanted to make something that has almost zero friction and makes it easy to make a journal entry, but doesn't give you all the bells and whistles of more advanced apps. And that's what they did.
Yeah. Yeah. The metadata you can control is location and date. And you can say, make my entry date and location based on what I've imported from the suggestions panel. The other thing you can do from the suggestions panel is you don't have to import the whole thing. So let's go back to the example of I went out yesterday with my family and have a group of photos from Disneyland, and I assume that's where you were. And
Yeah.
these are the photos, and also in that bundle of suggestions is actual location information. And you can, when you go to the suggestion, you can actually scroll through. It's like a carousel, it goes horizontal, and you can say, actually, I don't want all these photos. I just want a few of them. Actually, I don't want the location for whatever reason. Again, I want all the metadata. Like I love that day one even includes weather as metadata. I don't know why I love it. I just do. And so you can turn off unwanted components or metadata from the suggestion when you import it into the journal app. And again, thought through very well. Some people that's going to be really important to them for some one reason or another, and you have that optionality.
Yeah. I mean, on a privacy basis, journals and the journaling API are feature complete. I feel like they made sure all of that stuff was in there before they shipped it. In terms of just like convenience for journaling, there's several things missing. I mean, I think a time would be nice.
Yeah.
One that gets to me is multiple journals. I mean, if you go back and listen to the original episode of MPU, I honestly don't know how many journals I have. It's over 20. Like I've got one called Woodshop. So any woodworking project, I take pictures of it and write thoughts about it down as I'm working through it. And then I can go back later and kind of see the evolution of the project. But I want to be able to just limit it to woodshop entries. That's a silly entry. I have one for my garden too, right? For tracking how my plants are doing. And more normal people would say like have a personal journal and a work journal, and they'd want two, right? I take that to an unhealthy level, but that is something I like. And with the journal app, you get one, that's it.
Yeah. I just opened day one. I have 4, and the all being mashed into one. Yeah. I would want multiple journals. I could see Apple implementing this as tags instead of multiple journals. That maybe because it also doesn't have any tagging.
Yeah.
So maybe that feels like an Apple way to do it because that's how they do some things in notes and reminders and other places. But yeah, there's no way to organize or to categorize, I guess, different entries. You can filter entries by type. So you can say, show me all the entries that have photos in them, or all the activity based entries, or all the entries with location data. You can also bookmark types or bookmark entries, and it shows up as a new filter type. But again, it's not search, right? There's no search in journal that I can find. There's no tagging. There's no multiple journal support. It is basic. But if you think about the overarching conversation we've had now over the last 120 years on the show of like Apple's building tools for the 80% of people, most people probably wouldn't even think about multiple journals. Now, I do think some people would want search and some people may want time. Like there are different hierarchies here. But this is not as full featured as some other apps that have been around much longer.
Yeah, and I'm not sure they even intend to make it that way. I think they want a simple solution that makes it easy for people to journal about pictures with their family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think that Apple's really thinking about journaling in the way I am about a self-improvement tool. They just want you to be able to make nice, memories and journal events, and they're going to solve for that. But the good news is there's a whole ecosystem of other apps out there, and a lot of times when Apple gets into a space, they actually make it better for everybody else in the space too, because people start using the journal app, and if they decide they want multiple journals and additional features, they go find a tool that gives them that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I think we've seen that. I think we've seen that over and over. And I think that if I were writing a journal app, I would be glad the suggestions API was there, and I would also be glad that this app is built for the masses. But it's also day one, right? This is I didn't mean it like that. This is also the beginning of this app, right? This is version 1, and think about how far notes and reminders have come over the years, right? We may get to a point if we check in on this in 4 or 5 years that it is or it has adopted all these things. But right now they're not there.
Yeah. So, what is your recommendation at this point for the journal app? I mean, if someone comes to you and say, "Hey, should I be using this app?" What do you tell them?
I would say absolutely, absolutely you should. Take advantage of the suggestions API to bring content in. Make use of, even maybe if you're just starting, the notifications. I agree with you. I don't need them. I think people who this has become a practice don't need them, but I think it's useful starting out. Yeah, I would say absolutely. This can be something that you can start in and stay in for a long time. I think it's great. I'm glad Apple's done it. There are some things I would want, but I think for people getting started, or people who don't or can't do a subscription for an app like this, hey, this is on your phone. It's from Apple. It's going to be here forever, and those are all good things.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't cost anything. It's got the end-to-end encryption. It's got all the basics, and I think for a lot of people, it's all you need. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm an outlier with the way I journal and I use all the power features. I don't think most people do that, and if you don't need that stuff, then don't spend the money. Just get this, and you're good.
Yeah.
And like you said, Apple is not going to, once they put it there, they're not going to take it away. So you're good for the duration, really,
Mm-hmm.
with this app.
Mm-hmm. I do have just like one little thing I want to touch on before we move on, and it's the data situation. We talk about this in notes, right? Like, how do I get data in? But more importantly, how do I get data out?
Yeah.
Also, a bit of a concern in journaling apps. Day One has a bunch of import export options. A bunch of these other apps have it as well. There's nothing for journal. And because it's just on the iPhone, it's not like there's a Mac app that can like read the data off the disk and and export it, or
Yeah.
uh, Apple Script could go in there and get stuff right. So the import and export storage just isn't there in this app. And at some point, like if this comes to the Mac, I would expect Apple or a third party to solve for that. So if you're getting started in journaling and you start with the built-in free app, which again we both totally recommend, and you want to graduate to something else, that may be tricky. If you want to bring that history with you, I don't think that's a showstopper, because I think most people could just continue to use the journal app for a long time and be perfectly happy with it and really get a lot of use and benefit out of it. But I know that power users in the audience, including me and you, like, we kind of look at that. And again, I think Apple, if they move this to the Mac at some point, I think that story will develop.
Yeah. I mean, earlier I was talking about kind of if you want to do your own wisdom project for your grandkids. With Day One, you could make a specific journal and just call it Wisdom Project. And when it gets enough entries in it, you push a button and Day One prints a book with all those entries in it and
Yeah.
sends it to you.
It's the ultimate export, really, if you think about it.
Exactly. Or you could just save it as a PDF or whatever. I mean, there's all those options, and there's none of them in the current iteration of the journal app. I do think that I'd be shocked if that doesn't get better over time. I feel like they know, right, that you're going to want to export these at some point. So
Mhm.
I feel like that's going to get solved. But then again, with Apple, sometimes you just never know, right?
Yeah. We'll find out together at some point, I guess. I guess we'll see where that goes. This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by NetSuite. If you have a business, you might be able to relate to this. Your business gets to a certain size and cracks start to emerge. Things you used to do in a day are now taking a week. You have too many manual processes and you don't have one source of truth. It's never a good feeling when everything in your business is disjointed. Too many processes in too many places. You want clarity and you want one place where all the important stuff can happen. The solution to untangling that disjointed feeling is NetSuite. NetSuite is a software company that has developed a cloud based business management platform to help your team deal with key business processes like enterprise resource planning and financials, CRM, e commerce, inventory, and more. If you don't want those cracks to emerge in your business, you should know three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. All right, so what do those numbers mean? Well, there have been 36,000 businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite, in fact, is the number one cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. And 25 is because NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. And one, because your business is one of a kind. So you can get a customized solution for all of your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow, all in one place. Having all the information you need in one place makes it so much easier to make decisions. I know as a business owner what a difference that can make and how much easier everything operates when information is available. It really does mean that smart decisions can be made faster. So go download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance. It's absolutely free, and you can find it at netsuite.com/MPU. That's NETSUITE. netsuite.com/MPU. The link is in the show notes. Go there now, get that free KPI checklist, and make sure your business continues to thrive. Our thanks to NetSuite for their support of the show.
We have an entry in here that Steven added, and I just love the name of it. A sidebar on Sherlocking.
Yeah. Because I put something in the Notion document about does journal Sherlock apps like day one? And then I realized I don't know if we've ever actually talked about Sherlocking on the show. Maybe we have, and if we have, I'm sorry. That's why we have chapters. Or if you know what it means. But it's a term people have thrown around for a long time. I wrote a blog post about this. I'm going to try really hard not to faint when I say this. Over 10 years ago on 512 Pixels about sort of the history of this. And basically, back in like the late 90s, Apple shipped an app called Sherlock. We're talking like Mac OS 8.5, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it could search files on your computer, but it could also search the internet. Now, that's in like air quotes because really what the early versions of Sherlock did, like very specific. This is like before Google. This actually launched before Google. These were like very specific websites, like websites that just tracked flights or websites that just had sports scores, right? And you could search basically locally cached copies of their data. It was a weird time on the internet in 1998.
Yeah.
Apple improved it, right, over the years. They had version 2 in 1999 with an updated UI and better web search. In fact, if you go to the blog post, you can see some screenshots of this, like, oh, I want to search encyclopedia.com or Excite or InfoSeek, AltaVista, right? A bunch of these companies aren't around anymore. But it was really the Sherlocking term happened in 2001, 2002. And so Sherlock Mac's app, Apple's app on the Mac was getting better. But in 2001, a company called Corella Software launched Watson for OS X. And it was similar in nature, but had a very specific like 3-column design. It kind of looks like Finder if you look at the screenshot, where you could like go to Amazon and search for books and then search for popular characters and then search Disney. And then you would have a list of Disney characters, like find all the books that, you know, this character shows up in. You could really drill down into things. And it was of its time, right? There's a lot of pinstripes and aqua in these screenshots. In fact, in 2002, Apple awarded Watson with an Apple Design Award. Apple definitely knew about this app. And then in OS 10.2 Jaguar in 2002, Sherlock was brought to OS 10 by Apple. And basically just completely ripped off Watson, including the UI, including the way that it worked, even some of like the weird, like cool, kind of strange early OS 10 customizations that apps would do. Apple basically ripped it off. And that's where the name Sherlocking comes from. Watson would later go on to be sold off to Sun Microsystems of all people and just quietly die. But that's where it comes from. Apple had an app. They pivoted that app to go after a third party and killed the third party app. So that's where the term means. I don't think this happens very often in the modern era. The Sherlock Watson story is like definitely a blatant case of it, in my opinion. But now what we see is Apple moving into a category like task managers or note taking apps or journaling apps. And again, they build an app for the 80% of users, and they may take some users that are already paying for another app, but I don't think that happens very often. I think mostly what happens is people who weren't using these types of apps at all are suddenly interested, or like suddenly realize, oh, this is a thing that I could use, that I could take advantage of, and then maybe they move from Apple's stock app to a third party, more powerful app. And so I don't think Sherlocking is as prevalent as it may seem because the word gets thrown around a lot, but that's kind of what it means. That's the history of it.
Yeah, and it's funny to me because the interesting point that I think most people miss is Sherlock existed before Watson, right? Apple was in the category already, and the Sherlock wasn't that they jumped into the category and took it over, which is generally what people do call Sherlocking today. That's not what happened with Sherlock. Sherlock was already there, but they really did kind of rip off all of Watson's features, and that was really the thing that got people mad, right? It's like, well, why would you give them a design award and then just like rip them off? And they can because they're Apple, right? But you don't see that anymore. I feel like the way it's used now is when Apple gets into an existing category that they weren't before.
Yeah.
And but they, like you said, they rarely, Apple never goes in with like the power features, and I don't think they ever really intend to.
No. I think a modern example, like say that WWDC 24, Apple has a reminders update and they add perspectives, right? A highlight keynote feature of OmniFocus. But they do it in the same way OmniFocus does it, right? Like the UI is similar, the concept's similar, they call it the same thing or something very close to it. That would be more akin to the original meaning of Sherlocking than there's no reminders app and suddenly there is.
Agreed. And I don't really view this as Sherlocking. Like, I don't think, like you said, I don't think neither of us are going to be canceling our day one subscriptions, and there may be a few people, but I think ultimately day one and apps like day one are going to end up with more subscribers because of the existence of the journal app.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. So, and I don't think, honestly, most of the mature developers out there, when they see Apple come in the space, they don't freak out. They look at it as an opportunity, really. And I'm sure a lot of these guys, like day one, had the journaling API incorporated in day one, the same day that the journal app got released. I mean, those guys aren't dumb.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking around day one for a while. Let's update everyone on day one.
Yeah. So in the press release for the journal app launching, there's a quote from Paul Main, one of the founders of Day One. Day One, of course, part of Automatic now, but I think Automatic's done a great job, as they normally do when they buy up companies.
Yeah.
But the headline, I think, is that Day One is using the suggestions API that we talked about earlier. You've got to be on iOS 17.2, and you got to update Day One. But it works basically the same way it does in the journaling app. So in Day One, you start a new entry, and they've had a quick add bar for a while now. It's like photos, templates, and now suggestions is there as well. And if you tap suggestions, it brings up the exact same UI as we saw in the journal app, where you have recommended and recent, and you can pick whatever you want at that point, and only at that point does Day One know about that content. It works the same way as it does in the journal app. That content gets brought into Day One, but at this point, you're in Day One land, and you can do all the Day One stuff. So you can have it, move it from one journal to another. You can adjust the metadata, including time and weather. You can do all of the things that Day One does. And you mentioned a second ago, but I want to highlight it again. You can start an entry on Day One on the iPhone with content from the Suggestions API, sit your phone down, open up your MacBook Air, and then expand on that entry if that's where you're more comfortable with writing. Once it's in day one, it's day one-ified and has all the properties that a normal day one entry has. It just that you can start if you want to from the suggestions that Apple's API provides.
Yeah. And you mentioned it. We're not going to go in deep on day one today because we did a whole show on it a few years ago. But they have been purchased by Automatic, and the story behind that's interesting. The one of the Automatic CEO, his dad was dying, and he started using day one through that process and found it very beneficial, and as it would be, and he liked the app so much he bought it. But I think of all the companies to buy an app like day one, I don't think I can think of anybody better than Automatic, because they're going to leave it generally, and just give it the financial support it needs to keep it going. It gives you kind of an assurance that the app's going to be there for a while. Day one has an in-app purchase, and that is not inexpensive.
Yeah, it's 35 a year for day one.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, like if you get into journaling, you can spend $35 pretty quickly on notebooks or whatever.
Yeah.
And day one does a good job. I am perfectly happy to pay it. I know a lot of people are upset with the subscription because they came in early and bought the app. I was like that too. I bought day one, probably on day one. And but if we want the app to stay in business, you got to allow them to make money. And that's the way you do it in the app business. So I think I'm satisfied with it. And if you guys really want a more in-depth show on how we use day one, let us know in the comments and on the forums, and we can plan a show around it. But today we wanted to focus on journaling and the journaling API, and honestly talk about the thing we didn't the last time, and that's the alternatives to day one.
Yeah. I picked three really, and then we're also going to talk about using PKM apps for this. One that's come to my attention more recently is an app called Everlog. It's cross-platform, and on iOS, so on the iPhone, it supports the suggestions API, and it looks and works just like it does in Journal and Day One, because again, that is a system feature that Apple is providing. The app is definitely strongest on the iPhone. The Mac version really feels like the iPad app, and maybe not in the best way. But it can import a bunch of stuff, including exports from day one. So I took one of my journals and exported it from day one and imported it into Everlog, and it worked perfectly. You can use it for free, but there is an in-app purchase of $20 a year, so it's a little bit less than day one. And the in-app purchase unlocks a bunch of stuff, including iCloud sync between your devices. So if you just wanted to use it on the Mac, as far as I understand, you could use it that way. But again, the in-app purchase unlocks the sync. And it is, other than day one, I believe, at least in my research a few days ago, was the only other app that I found that was using the suggestions API at this point. I'm sure others will adopt it, and maybe maybe that's in the works now. But the Devin, the developer behind Everlog, wrote a nice blog post about implementing it, and with a bunch of screenshots, you can kind of see how it looks. There's also Mac Journal, which has been around forever. Mac Journal is it was sold in boxes in the Apple Store when I was a genius, like 15 or 16 years ago. It is.
When I saw this in outline, I just had a smile because I remember this app from like a long time ago. I'm looking at their website now. They got the Apple Design Award in 2002.
Yeah. Yeah. Same year as Watson, they
Yeah. And it's a Mac-based journaling app.
Yeah.
And it does the thing, right? You can download it for free. You want to journal on your Mac. You are not going to get the same feature set that you get using Apple's journal app, but you want to work on your Mac, and it's got a lot of metadata. I mean, it could work.
Yeah. Out of everything we're looking at, it's definitely the creakiest, and I don't mean that to say anything bad about who's working on it. It's just it's been around a long time, and it shows. It also changed hands a couple of times, I think, and they're looking at getting there was an iOS app, and now there's not. They're looking at bringing that back in with syncing, but it is definitely an option if you're Mac focused. And I will say, because I tried all of these, the import feature basically barfed when I pointed it at a day one export file. It pulled in title entries and dates, but no content in the entries, and so that was a little disappointing. But again, like, this app is older. It doesn't seem to get the most frequent updates. But that was my experience with it and testing it for this episode.
And I would say, in fairness, if you're using day one, you are very unlikely going to be moving to Mac Journal.
No.
I just don't see that. So I think it's a thing that's a starting place. If you want to get started on a free app and you want to just do it on the Mac, I would check it out. And the fact that it's still under active development is a good sign. I mean, they've kept it alive this long. I don't think there's any sign it's going to just disappear. But I am very biased. I mean, I just want to be honest. The $35 to me a year to day one to have, their modern feature set and all that support, to me, it's a no brainer. But it's not for everybody. So that's why we're trying to cover some of these. The last one you had added, I think, is a fascinating app. We've never talked about on the show, but Moleskine, the notebook company, has these apps. They have a calendar and this app called My Day. Or Moleskine Journey, I believe. It's just an interesting app. It looks so different. It's so opinionated.
The UI is wild in this app. Like, it is its own thing. And I really mean that mostly in the best possible way. Like,
yeah,
it's a journal, but it's also a planner. But you can also bring in like calendar events and notes and reminders and like cross link between all of those things.
It's a trip,
It is.
But I like the typography. I feel like there's some parts of it that are good. Like, there's somebody with a design aesthetic behind this who has an opinion.
Yeah.
And it either works for you or it doesn't. But it also, because I actually bought a year of this a few years ago when I was just looking at all the options out there. But it did, sometimes it wasn't entirely right for me. Like, sometimes it would just do funny things. And I'm not even going to call them bugs so much as just odd behaviors. And it never really stuck with me. And but it is very pretty, I think, in my opinion. I like the design of it.
It's $30 a year. It's one of those apps, kind of like Agenda. I'll have a link to Agenda in the show notes too, where it's like you can kind of combine calendar and notes and projects kind of into the same thing. If that's what you want, then Moleskine, Journey, and Agenda are like two of the best games in town for it. But yeah, not for me. But I know people who use it, like, friends online who swear by it. So it definitely has a following.
Yeah, and it's just such a different look, and I think for some people the look is enough to get them in the door.
Oh yeah, I think so too.
They got a year out of me because I just wanted to play with it because it was so different. Another way a lot of people do journaling these days is through PKM software. And the two big ones, I think, right now are Obsidian and Craft. I would recommend, if you want to do this, to do it in Obsidian and use Obsidian's sync service, because Obsidian has end-to-end encryption built in. But there's a strong case to be made for digital journaling via PKM. I actually did one of the experiments I did a few years ago when I first got infected with Obsidian disease was I stopped using day one for 3 or 4 months and did all of my journaling in Obsidian just because it can do it. And I wanted to turn it into my journal too. And honestly, it wasn't good enough for me. Like all the cool features in day one, Obsidian doesn't have them. It's not a journaling app. It's a notes app that I turned into a journaling app. But there are things about that, like the linking, in my kind of productivity system, which you'll hear about next week. There's a lot based on what I call roles and arete. And like I could link those in an Obsidian journal and they would automatically backlink to all the other entries that involve them. It gives you a lot of ways to see your data. And I know a lot of people, Mike Schmitz, my co-host over on the Focus podcast, does all his journaling in Obsidian. And he's built like special tools into it. Like he has one, Stephen, like when you open your journal page, it shows you how much time you have left before you die.
I don't I don't need that every day.
He figured it out. It's just like, well, it's using the average lifespan and how
Yeah.
old are you now? And it
Yeah.
like, but I mean, the idea of memento mori and being aware that you're not going to be here forever a lot of time is a great way to make sure you do the important stuff today. So I get it. And I'm not making fun of him for it. I think it's kind of cool, but I don't need that either. But that's the kind of thing you can do when you journal in an app like Obsidian. You can really craft the experience
Hmm.
around what you want. And I think that is not a bad solution. I know we have a lot of listeners that are deep in Obsidian. And if you don't want to pay $35 a year to day one and you want a journal, go ahead and set it up there and try it for a while. Maybe that's good enough for you. You can add pictures. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but it's not a journaling app. And I generally fall in favor to use best in breed apps. I spend a lot of money every year on app subscriptions and whatnot because I want the best in breed of everything.
Hmm.
And when you compare how much I spend on apps versus other things, it's not really that bad. So that's my choice, but it could work. Craft, on the other hand, they don't have an end-to-end encryption, so I feel like that's a big downside to Craft as a journaling tool, just like Notion and some of these other tools that they're using cloud-based data storage. And with no end-to-end encryption, I feel like as a journal, that's a big negative for me. But everybody make your own grown-up decisions on stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could also use Apple Notes. I mean, you don't need a fancy app if you want to get started journaling. However, now that Apple is giving us a free journal app, I think it'd be really hard to go to something just because it's free when you've already got a very good solution from Apple.
I agree. I think there was an argument to be made of like just open an Apple Note, put the date at the top, and start writing. But the journal app changes all that for me. And I think at this point, it's silly not to take advantage of the specific features that Apple's designed and that or these third party developers have designed for journaling. So yeah, the days of like having a long Apple Note or like a Word document or something, I think it's time to move on from that and use something a bit more specifically crafted for the use case.
Yeah. And I mentioned at the beginning analog journaling. I don't want to just dismiss that. There are a lot of people who have a very healthy journaling practice with analog journals and are proud of the line of books on their shelf of all the journals over the years. And if that is what it takes for you to journal, then I think you should do that, eschew the digital tools and just get yourself a book and start writing it. There's nothing wrong with that. Uh, I seriously considered it for this year, but ultimately decided against it because I am so digitally hip, right? I like dictating entries. I like the features I get from a digital journal, and the use I have for a journal is really something that is self-facing. So I don't really feel like I need to have the books on the shelf. And I also do think there's a risk with analog journaling because I was, as we were prepping for the show, like I said, I did the bullet journal method course, which I think would be, if you were going to do an analog journal, I would seriously look at some of those videos. They've got some of the free ones on the on YouTube. The ones from Ryder Carroll are the ones I'd recommend. He's the guy who came up with the whole thing to begin with. And then if you want, they have a course. I think that's a very practical way to do an analog journal. But if you watch the videos of people that are promoting analog journaling, some of it feels to me a little like precious, like
Yeah.
like people who want to I don't know, smoke a pipe and wear a jacket, right? And like I feel like there's like a thing to it. Like some people do these analog journals like they think they're Marcus Aurelius,
Hmm.
and the joke is Marcus didn't want to share his journal. So he wrote it down because that was the only method you had back then. But my guess is he probably would have used day one if it was available to him. But but that there's a bit of a slippery slope with analog journaling that can get you in trouble. But the flip side is, I think for some people, digital journaling is hard because they're working on computers all day and they don't want to journal there. They want to sit somewhere else with a pen and paper, and they feel like the process of writing it out allows them to be more, thoughtful. And if that's you, then do that. It's fine.
Yeah. Totally fine.
something I didn't say at the beginning, I wish I had, was I feel like, to me, the biggest benefit of journaling is the moment of journaling. To me, like, I get my money's worth in the time that I write the journal, and I get the insight right at that moment. It's like I write it down, like, oh yeah, look, you're really thinking about this a lot. Maybe you need to solve that problem. Like, I was looking at, I've been writing so much in my journal about dealing with customer support email. I'm like, okay, I gotta like solve this. This is a problem that's ongoing with me for months now. And so I'm gonna look into solutions for that. And that is, that's the benefit of the journaling. Like, years later, I can go back and read that, and that'll be great. And sometimes it's fun to see them. But for me, the payoff is in the moment of journaling. To that extent, it really doesn't matter what tool I use. Like, if I used a yellow legal pad and a Bic pen, I would still get the payoff, but I'm just looking for efficiencies in the process.
So that's journaling in 2024. Lots of great options. I'm glad Apple's moved into this space, and I think it will hopefully mean more people can take advantage of this, because I know for both of us and for a lot of people we've talked to, it can mean real difference in your life. And I would say, if you haven't tried the Apple app, give it a shot. You might be really pleased with it.
Yeah, and just try to journal. Using the broad outline of what we talked about today. Think about why you would want to do it, and just try it. We're in January. This is a great opportunity to try and pick up a new habit. And don't beat yourself up over it. Do it when you can, and see what insight you get out of it. I feel like the payoff comes pretty quickly if you start journaling.
Yeah.
Thank you to our sponsors today, 1Password and NetSuite. We are the Mac Power Users. If you are a subscriber to More Power Users, we're going to talk about 2 years of Indy Sparky today, and that More Power Users is where you get the ad-free extended version of the show. Regardless, Happy New Year, everybody, and good luck in 2024.